now. And welcome to the agenda.
Yes, please. Good morning, everybody here, and there are more people out online, right? How many, Michael?
7.
7. Okay, I'm Frances Benoski. I'm the Director for Adult Education at the Higher Education Department. And I think we ought to begin by introducing ourselves. First, we'll start with the people who are present in the conference room. Loretta.
Good morning, I'm Loretta Montoya. I'm the comptroller at Central New Mexico Community College.
I'm Mark Chisholm. On this committee, I guess I'm representing UNM because somebody from UNM was supposed to be on it, but I spend most of my time up at the HED nowadays.
My name is Kate Chavez. I'm a fiscal analyst at the Legislative Finance Committee.
And I'm Rachel Mercer-Smith, a program evaluator at the Legislative Finance Committee.
Good morning, my name is Michael Wright. I'm an analyst for Adult Basic Education.
And
we're going to go and say hello to everyone in the field. I'm going to go ahead and unmute everybody. All right, let's see here. Rachel, can you say hello? Okay. Terry, good morning. Can you say hello?
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Absolutely.
Hello?
It's
Yes.
wonderful.
Okay.
Good morning, Thomas. Can you hear us?
Tom McGaggy?
Yes, I can. I can hear you. Can you hear me? Yes, Tom McGaggy with New Mexico State University at Grants.
Right, and Terry is from Catholic Charities. They're both ABE program directors.
Yes, I am.
Tina, good morning. Can you hear us?
ABE?
Good morning, I can hear you. I'm the ABE manager at UNM Valencia.
And Catherine, can you hear us? Good morning.
Good morning. Yes, I can hear you fine. I'm at CNM.
Welcome.
Want to introduce yourself to us? Sure. Lisa Wisner from UNM.
How about Gloria?
Gloria, good morning. Can you hear us? Gloria, can you hear us at all? So everybody who has not had an opportunity to speak, the chat box is open and we welcome all of your input. And everyone is currently unmuted and can speak freely.
Okay, I think that this is all about House Memorial 99, and before we talk about 99 itself, I'd like to give you all an overview of adult education really quickly, if that's okay. So we have that slideshow. Let's try to begin with slides. Am I allowed to play this quickly?
Yes, you are. Yes,
Okay, I'm not going to destroy anything.
Nope, you can click.
Okay. Isn't moving. Just run it. Oh my, someone else has used this and fancied it up. Okay. So adult education, briefly, I'm not going to read it all. You can tell it's old. It was begun as a military program in World War II. And the Adult Basic Education Act was signed by President Johnson in 1964. It was a part of the anti-poverty initiative. And since then, it's always been part of the anti-poverty, but it's evolved as the nation's determination of what best helps get rid of poverty. So now it's very workforce focused. And until finally in 1998, that act was repealed, and the Workforce Investment Act put adult education in Title II. So we've been funded by the Workforce Investment Act since 1998 and on a continuing resolution since 2005 or something. But right now, there's a Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act that's just been passed by the Senate, the U.S. Senate. So it's going to be reauthorized, we think. Okay, it's got to be a keyboard. We serve about 5% of the eligible population, measured in terms of those who, according to the census, don't have a high school credential or have English as a second language needs. We have, you can see, most of our students live in households with incomes at or below poverty level. We did that by comparing them student by student. This is not a statistical deduction. We took the size of their household and compared it to the poverty level. This is 100% poverty level, not 130% or any of that. 9% of them come in pretty much ready to get a high school credential. That's what's the adult secondary level, and that's what's the fast. Oh no. This is the Workforce Investment Act. We're Title II. The Workforce Solutions is Title I. So go on, Michael, to the next bullet. Oh, and it expired in 2003. All right, so, but we're about ready to get a new one. Next slide, please, Michael. These are the objectives of adult education. All of the federally funded programs need to have these objectives. To help adults contribute to their communities and support their families, and these are allowable activities. We help them learn basic literacy, earn a high school credential, study English as a second language, prepare for college and careers, and enter training for entering the workforce. Go on, Michael, please. We have 26 programs, about 20,000 students. It goes above and below that year by year. They have to be 16 and older and test below the high school completion level. Now, when I said at the beginning that we serve 5% of the approximately 400,000 who are eligible for our services, those were measured by looking at the people over 25 who do not have a high school credential. We, in fact, can serve people who do have a high school credential if they're 16 or over. The people with a high school credential have to test on any of a number of standardized tests below grade 12.9. Next. 20 of our programs are administered out of community colleges or branch campuses. 3 are CBOs, 2 are in tribal colleges, and 1 is a tribal school board. Most of those 26 administrative sites also have satellite locations where they provide instruction. These are demographics, sort of sample ones. I won't spend a lot of time on them, but you see that more than half of the students enter at the 9th grade level or below. More than a third are ESL students, English as a second language. And 40% of our students are Hispanic females. In a typical year, about well, more than 2,000 earn a high school equivalency credential, currently the GED. Around 1,000 transition to post-secondary education, about 1,500 enter the workforce who weren't there before, and 1,000 reported enhanced income or job promotions after they leave our program. Now this is funding for last year. We're funded by a federal allocation, which is determined by formula by the U.S. Department of Education, Office of Career, Technical, and Adult Education. It's done based on their computation of the state's need. State appropriations in 12-13 were $5.3 million plus. Other contributions, these are in kind, as reported by the programs. That includes things like classroom space, partial salaries, donated tutoring, $7.6 million. There's an additional instructional materials fund that it comes from federal oil and gas leases, a separate statute that goes to public education department, and they distribute some of it to adult education. Per year, per student, $889 we have, and that includes in-kind contributions. The legislature contributed last year $278 per student. That funding goes to the higher education department as part of its operating budget. And these are current initiatives. We don't need to discuss these at this moment, but I'll quickly say that we're doing a program called IBEST, which is a collaboration with community colleges. It's an integrated classes that a team taught to reduce the need for remediation and improve completion rates in career technical training at the college. We're piloting distance learning programs, trying to get that together, and recently the term GED has been removed from all legislation because there are other high school equivalency tests, and the state did not want to necessarily limit itself to using that particular one, that particular publisher. So that's that. Could you put up HB 99? You've all looked at House Bill 99, I'm sure. I mean, House Memorial 99.
Overview?
No, the 99, this says HM099. It's just a PDF. That one. It begins with a lot of facts, the whereases about adult education, most of which we've just looked at. Scroll down, Michael, keep going, please. And we will arrive at the now therefores. That's why we're here. HED has formed this work group in response to this House Memorial to study the feasibility of fully funding the formula for adult education programs. We'll talk about what our formula is. We need to decide what fully funded means, and then says who should be in the work group. Carry on, Michael, please. And who's going to be the staff for supporting it. And we have to compile data about the need, and then stop, Michael, please. Further resolve that the work group recommend a fully funded formula based on a full workload that is adjusted annually. And those are what we have to figure out. So in preparation for that, we're going to look at the Some issues you see on the agenda. What's the meaning of full funding, full workload, annual adjustment, and then there's a maintenance of effort issue that is problematic, but not as problematic as people may think. So, beginning with funding, I'm going to show you the current funding, and that's the PBS slide. We, in 2010-11, started funding adult education. Slow sort of slideshow or something. Yeah. We introduced performance-based funding. You'll see at the top there is a base grant of $70,000 per year per program. The theory behind that is that that's what it takes to keep the doors open to a small program or help them open the doors. We designed this formula in 2010 with the help of consultants, a grant from the Department of Education to hire these consultants who had a lot of experience in performance-based funding for adult education. So we have a set aside for performance, which has now risen to 20%. The remaining 80% we call the core. And out of the core, we take a base grant of $70,000 that goes to everybody no matter their size. We look at head count, and then we do a need calculation based on the same way the feds do it. And it's based on educational need. That's 5% of the core is about need. And you can see the intent of the core funding versus the intent of performance funding. Now, the reason I showed you this is because one way of looking at full funding is, can you afford to give a performance incentive? The way it works now, our funding was $6.7 million from the state in 2010. It's now down to $5.1 million per year. And so we've been being reduced and then tending to remain flat. And when you have a performance component to a funding formula and you do that, what happens is it's a zero-sum game. The people who perform very well and get rewarded can't be rewarded without taking money away from the people who didn't do as well, even if they perhaps did pretty well. So performance-based funding is, in a way, unless we can have new money, we'll need to figure out a different way to fund. Because it's cannibalistic, you know, and our people like to work together in the field and not compete with each other. It's unstable. It makes it hard for them to plan. So that's an issue. And to my mind, that's one of the things I think this memorial might mean by fully funding. I feel pretty sure they don't mean give adult education enough funding to serve 400,000 students instead of 20. You know, that's another way to look at it. But full funding to keep going the way it is. So that's an issue there. And that's go ahead.
Can I ask a question? Are there 20,000 because that's all that have currently signed up for it, or are there 20,000 because that's all the programs can afford to serve?
It's all they can afford to serve. And to give you an example, we get a total, in terms of cash funding, to spend on students, not counting the in-kind contributions. We get $10-ish million a year. We have 26 programs and roughly 20,000 students. Arizona gives 3 times the federal funding, because they're 3 times as big, pretty much, and have similar needs. They get about the same funding from the state. And they have 25 programs, and they serve 17,000 to 18,000 students a year and feel that's all they can serve. They have a state staff of 17 people. We have a state staff of 3 or 4, depending. So that's sort of the custom mark in New Mexico is we can just, oh, that's as many as we can afford. There could be people's opinion that we're serving too many. Are there other questions about that? It's not so far, okay. So now, we don't have to change any slides right now. The full workload, looking at that, what might that mean? That was kind of hard for me. I know that full workload, I believe in public education is something about full-time enrollment. Do you all know anything about this? Is that right? Okay, because we of course can't exactly do full-time enrollment. Leave that slide up though, Michael. Okay. We can't do full-time enrollment because our students are adults. They come because they want to, and many of them only when they can. But when you look at how we count head count, I was thinking that might be the equivalent of FTEs in other people's formulas. And in the past, until this very year we're beginning, head count was determined by the number of students who had 12 or more contact hours, because that's how the Department of Education determines it. That's the students they want us to report on, and they ignore the rest. But as we came to this year for our funding formula task force decided that we should only count students who have 40 or more hours, contact hours. And the reason for that is that we felt that that demonstrates that the programs have done something with those students if they keep them for 40 hours. Our assessments, our student assessments that we use, don't permit post-testing in fewer than 40 hours. Some require even more. So that's why we chose 40 hours. So our head count currently is those who have 40 hours or more, and those with fewer than 40 hours who got a high school equivalency credential. Because sometimes we get students, often we get students who dropped out of high school who are good students. They're just bored and they decide I'm not going to stay here anymore, and they just take a GED. They come and do a few brush-up things and they take a GED, and it doesn't take them 40 hours. But we wanted to give the programs credit for dealing with those students too. So it's 40 hours or more, and the ones who have fewer than 40 hours and got a GED. Performance. When we measure performance, I need to tell you what we look at. We look at educational functioning levels. Did they make a level gain according to our assessments? That's one piece. The second piece, the program gets points for the students who attained a high school equivalency credential. The third is they get points for the students who transition to post-secondary education. And fourth, they get credit for students who entered the workforce. And fifth, the students who kept their jobs who were about to lose them or got raises. So that's how we measure performance at the moment.
So how do you measure students who keep their jobs? Like how do you find that?
How do we find out?
Yeah, like with an accurate measurement of that.
That's probably our least accurate measurement. That is self-reported. For, obviously, the assessments, you can see how we do that, but for GED, we do data matches using social security numbers and first name, last name, birth date. We do the same for transitioning to post-secondary. We match our data with the agency's database called eDear, which is about post-secondary students. We match that data. Now, the unfortunate part about that is when we do that, we only get the students who entered New Mexico public post-secondary institutions. We don't get students who entered St. John's College or University of Texas or entered post-secondary career training somewhere or University of one of those private and proprietary places. So that's how we get that data. And we get the entered employment data by a data match with Workforce Solutions database. And that gives us a lot of good information. A quarter of our students don't have or don't provide one of the other Social Security numbers, which is not so much of an issue if you're looking for the ones who got jobs, but it's an issue in all the other data matches.
Well, it's an issue for that too, because usually the job of Workforce Solutions is also Social Security numbers. So. But unless they self-report.
But people without socials don't usually get jobs, is what I meant by that.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
We aren't missing as many there.
I see what you're saying. Yeah. I guess that's my feature.
Yeah. And we don't get to count, well, that's neither here nor there. We don't get to count federally funded grant jobs like they do a Job Corps project. Annual adjustment, I think we just looked at that. To annually adjust it, there's a question about how should one do that, and we can talk about that in a minute. And then I wanted to explain maintenance of effort as best I can. And I don't know if it will be the same after the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. But right now, the Workforce Investment Act requires that for any state that's funded for adult education through them, 1/4 of the state's total adult education funding must be provided by state and local government, which means the state is required at minimum to provide 1/3 of what the feds require. See what I mean? Because there's 4 quarters in a pie divided in 4 pieces, and we're supposed to provide one of those quarters, and the feds provide the other. So, and if the state provides more than that, the state must maintain the effort. So there's a match requirement of that 1/4 of all the ABE funding must be provided by state or local government, but then there's a maintenance of effort requirement. So if the state commits more, then they've got to stick with that, and they are not supposed to drop below 10% of that. 90% of that. They can't drop more than 10%, or the feds start to reduce funding.
Does the in-kind count towards the state funding or just the state appropriation?
It can. And because we got $6.7 million in 2010, we are now below our maintenance of effort requirements in terms of cash contributions, so we must count some of that in order to avoid losing federal funding. But that doesn't help the programs, because that in-kind stuff they have, they're just losing cash to provide instruction and instructional materials.
Because I know the federal allocation is based on census data, what happens if we drop below 90%? But our demographics remain the same. Does that make sense?
If the federal funding stays the same because the demographics are the same, and we drop below a 90% of our maintenance vendor contribution, they will cut us.
So we will get less even though our demographics are the same.
Just that, yeah, right. They require that maintenance of effort to show commitment. Now, I believe Texas provides precisely what it's supposed to. I believe Arizona provides precisely what it has to for match the 25% of the total.
I have another question. So if we're substantially more than our 25% right
We're
now.
about 100 and something. Yeah.
So if we dropped, but we're still much more than the 25%, but we're below 90%, we still would get it. Okay.
Yes. And then another example is Minnesota is several thousand % contribution. So there's a big variation across the country. And so one concern that I know will come up if, let's say the legislature decided that fully funding adult education meant, and adjusting it annually, meant providing some extra money for performance incentives, but meant adding funding. If it increased every year, or if it increased enough that went above 6.7 million, it could raise our maintenance of effort requirement, which could make everybody nervous in case the economy went sour or something. But there is a way to avoid that. In order to count funding as maintenance of effort, you have to spend it according to the same rules that you spend the federal funding, on the same allowable expenses to provide people 16 years and older, blah, 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 all that stuff, and you can only spend it on certain allowable expenses. And there are some things we would like to do that we can't spend it on. If we spend any of our state funding on those things we would like to do, but they aren't federally allowable, we can't count that toward our maintenance of effort. We're allowed to do it. The feds won't stop us from doing it, but they just won't let us count it as maintenance of effort. So if we had extra funding, we could decide to earmark it for non-allowable expenses, like paying for a GED test. We can't do that now. Like providing transportation. I mean, there are many, many things we can't do right now. So there are ways to avoid raising the maintenance of effort and still funding the programs better, and with funding they could definitely use. And what I'm trying to figure out at this meeting from all of you is, what is our job? I know we need to provide information to the legislature so they can get creative about what they want to do or do not want to do. So we'll need data. I think we, as a group, need to decide what in fact is meant by full workload. I mean, I just suggested the only thing I could think of. We need to figure out what is meant by fully funding adult education. And we need to examine, when it says adjusted annually, what would be the criteria. I drew myself a picture. Michael, it's called something like that. But I saw it once. That was issues that I saw. There are 4 main branches there: maintenance of effort, performance-based funding, full workload, and annual adjustment. And I was thinking the annual adjustment could be based on any number of things like headcount, program performance, economic need, program need, full workload, who knows what that means up on the right. Performance-based funding might be up for grabs. If there's no change, we might have to lose that and think of something else that doesn't harm programs so much. And then maintenance of efforts. I think we addressed that, at least to my satisfaction, that issue can be avoided. Could I ask people here and in the ether, do you have ideas about what is meant by full workload in that House Memorial, or what might be, or other suggestions about what we might define it as?
So someone just asked a question.
Yeah,
clarification, the 40 contact hours, is that over a year? And is there any, is it traditional semesters, or does it look very different?
Okay, yes, for everybody's information, it looks very different among the programs. Some of the programs have classes that are aligned with the semester at the college. And also allow students to drop in. Some have them aligned with the semester at the college and do not allow them to drop in. They have managed enrollment. Some do both and provide extra tutoring in the evenings or other times of day. An increasing number of programs have managed performance but shorter terms, like half a semester, because the intensity of instruction is helpful. The struggle for each program making these decisions about how to do it is based on issues of, first of all, student success, which militates toward intensity of instruction. And then on the other hand, student access, because some of our students have jobs and they can't do that everyday thing. Or they can only do it in the evenings, and the program is too small to offer both. You know, it's a hard decision for them. And these programs watch their data closely and try to figure out how to best serve the students. They pay attention to how did this work, how did that work. So if it's aligned to a semester, greater than 40 hours roughly fits, a 3-credit class? Wouldn't it?
45.
Yeah. So, did that answer your question?
Sounds like it's very diverse in the way
it is very diverse.
Are structured.
Is any of it ever online?
Increasingly. We have initiatives now. There's a branch there called Program Need under Annual Adjustment. I have a whole list of things that we need funding for. One of them is to better support and enhance our efforts to develop distance learning. We're working now with a program at the University of Michigan called Project Ideal, which is about distance education for adults. It's a nationwide thing, and not all states are members, but many are. So that's what we're doing. And some of our programs are offering hybrid classes. But we're still evolving that, Mark, to make it good. You know, we've got to learn more about the pedagogy, for one thing, that works best, and a lot of things like that.
So if a student does a class in the fall and a class in the spring in a more traditional setting, they might have more than 40 contact hours both over the course of the year. But each still count them as one head count.
Yes.
But if you were doing like an FTE, and 40 was the FTE number, it'd be like 2
Would it?
FTE because.
Oh.
So do you have total contact hours at all? I mean, do you know people that only took 20 contact? I mean,
We can do it student by student. Yeah,
there's another possibility would be just to look at, see how different it is. But look at total contact hours and divide by 40 and see how that number compares with your head count number.
You directors out there, did you hear that? Tina, Terry?
Yes.
Yeah, what do you think of that?
Yeah.
That's another way to look at it. So you
I can't hear.
Oh, sorry. I just to get more information about the sheer volume of what's being done. If you have total contact hours, then a possibility would be to look at the total contact hours and divide by 40 and see how that number compares with your head count number if you're only counting people that have 40 or more. Because it sounds like over the course of a year, some individuals might have like 80 hours if they're fully engaged, or more if they're fully engaged in the fall and the spring, and other people, I don't know, it would just be another way of looking at it in terms of documenting need and how many people are being served or how much effort is being done. If that data exists, it would just be useful just to get a fuller picture.
It does exist. So that's a piece.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So you're telling me that in a, say, a college setting, an FTE over the course of an academic year, if the student was full-time one semester and full-time the next semester, they would count twice? I mean, that would count as 2 FTEs?
It's tricky.
Oh.
It's tricky. You're using state fiscal rules and you're saying what is the FTE in a fall? You add up the total number of credit hours, and if they're undergraduate students, then you divide by 15, where 15 is considered to be 1 FTE. If you're doing it over the course of a full year, you add up all the credit hours and then you divide by 30. So that's kind of how it's done. But if you're using data, like for example, if you're using the data the federal government collects from iPads, and you're trying to estimate FTE there, then what they often do there in iPads, we report students who are full-time or part-time. Full-time is somebody enrolled for 12 or more hours. And so there they tend, as a rule of thumb, it's total full-time plus 1/3 of the total part-time, which ironically, if you had all the raw credit hours and divided by 15, those two numbers are usually remarkably close to each other. This is the way it works out.
Okay.
But so there's lots of ways of doing it, but it's useful. So if I'm describing what's going on at an institution, I'll probably report FTE and head count, because how many bodies are being served, what's the effort in terms of, credits being offered, and usually you get that fuller picture. Funding in higher ed, most of the funding historically has gone for the credit hours, so the FTE is important. But there's some funding, like for student services, that's based on head count.
Right.
Because, you use a certain amount of student service contact regardless if the person's taking 1 class or 6. But there's a lot more cost to the institution for the student taking 6 classes versus 1. So oftentimes you use both depending on what you're doing.
Well, we use head count only when we distribute those instructional materials funds that come from oil and gas leases, because
Sure, exactly. Everybody
same
needs.
reason.
Right.
Now, how about this? If I add this complication, 40 or more hours is the minimum allowed by any of our assessments before you can post-test a student, just to see if they made an educational function level gain. However, very few students make a level gain with the minimum time. I think in our state, it tends to be 80 to 100 hours. Actually, that's not just us. Am I about right with that? Directors out there, it's like 80 to 100.
It varies. It varies.
Level. So we could measure it also by, do they make level gains? Or do they take a post-test? Or
And to a certain degree, like a level gain, for example, is maybe it's analogous to, I don't know whether it be analogous to a student receiving a certificate or a student going from freshman to sophomore year. I'm not sure.
It's more analogous to a student gaining about 3 grade levels.
Okay.
We give them one educational function.
Right. But that's clearly an outcome to be measured and possibly rewarded or funded, because clearly you have a concrete measure that you've done something positive with the contact hours that have been invested. But you still have to spend a certain amount of money to get the contact hours. And
So full workload really refers to how much money you have to spend, right? Does it?
Say that again.
Full workload, that phrase.
I'm not sure.
Does it refer to, it shouldn't just refer to how far students get outcomes. It should refer to the work put in.
Probably.
So that's why we get back to figuring out how to count FTEs some way, right?
I mean, yeah, you might, in a way you might want to, because I mean the contact hours is how much effort is being done, and the level gains as one of the measures of how much good is it doing. Are you being successful? Is it working? You have other measures too you've listed on the performance thing. It's not just level gains, but it's getting or maintaining a job or getting your GED. I mean, there's other measures as well, but it would be one of the ways that you could document the program is accomplishing some of its stated aims. But you also need to fund the work being done, and then you get into all the tricky thing, because if a program is being much more effective than another one, should they be getting more money? Or that's where the discussion comes in, right? That's where it gets hard.
Well, that's about our funding.
Francis?
Yes. Is that Terry?
Francis, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to kind of throw a wrench, if that's okay.
Oh.
What if full workload was? Can you hear me? Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, we hear you very well.
Okay. Okay. What if full workload were related to the teacher's workload? If we're talking about properly funding adult education, it's imperative that we start looking at how much it costs for direct service, and more importantly, how much it costs for full-time teachers for direct service, because most programs have to go with adjunct professors or part-time instructors because that's all that they can afford. But when you look at programs that have full-time instructors, at least at Catholic Charities, I know that part of the reason that we do better is because we have full-time instructors. But there's a cost to that. There's a much more increased cost to having people who can teach 20, 25 hours a week straight, and then also do all of the side work that's necessary, the professional development that's necessary, the tutoring of students, the one-on-one work. So that's a cost that might be considered when you're talking about full workload.
I think
if I can add to that, this is Tom McGaggy. Is that all right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Again, in my program, I've got a small to medium-sized program here in Grants, and just with my salary and all the benefits and everything else, and my data tech, that eats up 2/3 of our entire budget, right there. And then we're not talking about any of the supplies, any of the instructional materials, anything of that nature. But it basically eats up 2/3 of our budget. And I'd love to have full-time instructors, but there is no way. I can't even afford one full-time instructor to be able to operate the program. And yet we do fairly well with our program
I
here
want
in
to
Grants.
put this in some perspective. A little bit nationwide, a very small minority, I can't remember the exact number, of adult education instructors are full-time. It's also there. I haven't ever read a single study that did not make having full-time instructors a best practice. It is so easily linked to student success. Tina has a question too.
If I may also.
Wait just a second, Tom. We have some students that are much more difficult, usually due to learning difficulties.
I was going to tie in with Tina's comment. I don't know, what is it, something like 70%, Francis, of our students come in with at least one skill, ninth grade or below?
Yes.
And a good proportion of our students are fourth and fifth grade skill levels. And everybody thinks that adult ed, well, they come in full-blown with high school or close to high school completion skills, and that's not the case.
Right, then let's remember also that high school graduates who take our tests score
Yes.
like that too, like well below ninth grade. So I want to make it real clear here, we've got to be careful. We're not, when I brought up our funding formula, I was bringing it up to illustrate the issues we have related to our low funding that doesn't change. This memorial is not about how do we fund sub-grantees. It's about how does the state figure out some systematic way to decide how much funding to appropriate or not for adult education. And then, depending on how they do that, of course, it will affect our funding formula about funding sub-grantees. So when we talk about the students making level gains and how long it takes them, to me right now that's a little too much detail when we're trying to decide what to count as a full workload. However, could you get that thing back up? That thing. When we talk about annual adjustment by the legislature, not by us, one of the thoughts the legislature may want to give is what our program needs. In this state, and everyone needs to know this who doesn't know it, many states have certification requirements and education requirements for their teachers. In this state, we do not, and many other states do not. Before I get to the reason for that, I want to then point out that what the outcome of our not having those requirements is that our our teachers need more professional development than most. In fact, even when we have people who are certified K-12, they need a lot of professional development because it is not the same teaching adults. And so professional development is a huge need we have.
Is that one of the expenditure categories that you're allowed to spend federal money on?
We are, but we wouldn't have to count state money we spent on it if we did it in a certain way.
Okay, you could find a way to do it and not have it count against your maintenance of effort.
For example, we only have a maximum amount we can spend on professional development for the feds. So, yeah, we can figure out how to not count anything as maintenance of effort. But so professional development is a huge need. Full-time faculty is a huge need. So if the legislature wanted to examine program needs as a way of figuring out how to adjust funding, there's an endless number of things we can look at. When I have economic need, that's if the legislature wants to act in a way that's purely responsive to industry and maybe getting the economy back on track. They could measure things like, they could look at how giving adult education more money to help them transition students into career pathways, or to help support initiatives that do that, like IDES. Or they could simply look at state program performance, or
just adding it.
Okay. I can't see the other thing.
Glorious, I like the
No, I wanted to see the other thing on my chart. Or head count, right, measured in some way. So I feel that a major part of our job is to come up with some kind of suggestions like that. Is that what it looks like to you from House Memorial 99? How the legislature might go about making funding decisions. Okay, what did Gloria have? About direct services, there is also significant cost to the state professional development. Hiring and retaining staff takes time and a lot of PD training resources. Okay, this is true. We know that it's far more economically, it's a far better cost-benefit ratio to retain than to replace. We have, in some of our programs, we have very gifted teachers who have only a GED. They are not secure. They don't feel like real teachers. They want professional development. They don't have the vocabulary for what they do. They need that, and they will stay with us if they get that. We have teachers who are very well trained on paper who are not so gifted, who need professional development. We have the iBest initiative, as an example, requires team teaching and involves professional development for a career technical instructor at a college and an adult basic education instructor to learn how to redesign that class to be taught in a team-taught environment with two sets of objectives and not increase the student's workload. You know, which can be done. It's just they need training about how to do that. So when we do we need training about distance education and how to really design good hybrid classes. Do you do flipped classes? Do you do, you know, there are all these things that people need to learn. So there are huge program needs that just can't be met now. I mean, you see that with that amount of funding per student per year, it's ridiculous. Well, it's not ridiculous. People do very well. We do very well. Last year we had a 90% pass rate on adult GEDs, which was the top 25% of the country. You know, so we're a piece of education that's in New Mexico that's very accountable and not all bad news. You know, so.
Can I mention another wrench that I think will be difficult?
Okay.
So, I mean, I think part of determining full funding is determining need. And yet we have the 400,000 statistic of adults who probably would benefit or would qualify, but there are relatively few adults reported on the waiting list. So it's what, like 1,300 students statewide, and those waiting lists tend to be concentrated in a few programs. And so when we talk about program need, I think one challenge is quantifying the student need, because that seems to be a big difference. 1,300 students versus 400,000. Then I think it's probably worth a discussion.
Well, that's, and the only way for us to, that waiting list thing is, as you said, those are kept by a few programs. It's a lot of work for them to keep waiting lists, and it's a lot of work to figure out what a waiting list means. How long are they on it? When did they get on it in the year? How long did it take them to get off of it? Most programs just don't keep them. They you have someone on your waiting list, you're starting a new orientation, and people on your waiting list aren't showing up, but people who aren't on your list do. What do you do? So most don't have chosen not to keep it. Now about need, I mean, that's one kind of need. Like, how many people need to have their education functioning level improved? That's one need. Another kind of need, student need we could measure is how many of our students, how many people in the state do not make a living wage? And how can we serve them and ensure that they qualify for jobs that exist in New Mexico and pay a family supporting wage. That's another way to measure student need. Another way could be who are the least literate. Should we serve them more? Another way could be who are the most likely to be able to quickly move forward. Should we spend more energy serving those instead of the least literate? So there are so many ways. And the other thing is, what should we, those 400,000 do not include high school graduates who could use our services to help avoid spending so much of their financial aid on developmental ed, because we're free. So I think that's an important question, that to determine funding amounts and adjusted funding, it's important to look at student need, but also how best, then what to fund to fill student need.
I don't have an answer.
I don't either, but this is important, yeah. Do we want to increase our head count, or do we want to be like Arizona and do better with fewer?
Francis? One of the questions that was written up there, a comment, referred to a lot of their students having learning disabilities, which I would imagine would require a whole nother type of professional development. But are there other resources available for, other sources of funding or other kinds of programs that can help somebody who's got documented learning disabilities?
Yes, but here's how it works for us. The people who are in institutions, those institutions are required to help. But our issue for professional development is giving people enough professional development to identify the need in the student and refer them, for one thing. And the other thing is some learning differences can be addressed without accommodations, just by teachers teaching differently or better, Now for the programs that are community-based organizations, those programs are not only funded by us. Those poor people scramble everywhere for grants. And they are particularly good at forming community networks where they need to refer people. So I would say there is no need in adult education in this state to actually pay for the comprehensive services to be delivered to people with learning disabilities. But there is a need to get the money to help us be able to be sure we identify them and get them referred. That's what I think. Now, I don't know. Does somebody out there disagree with me?
No, but I would say, Francis, that a good number of the students that we work with have undiagnosed disabilities but would not qualify for most services. But even if we could offer those services, they would still not qualify because federal and state funding generally won't help for people who are undocumented. So it's not, I don't think it's an issue that we could necessarily, even if we couldn't refer them, it's not necessarily an issue that we could cover.
Right. And in addition to undocumented folks, we also have refugees in our system. Like Catholic Charities is a, what do you call it, Terry, a federal refugee center?
Well, yeah, the Federal Refugee Program is a United Nations to the State Department program where they send them to us and we help them acclimate to our culture and community and teach them English. But of course, what the State Department thinks is that after 4 months, someone who's never been exposed to English and can't read or write should be able to speak English and get a job. Obviously, none of them have worked with adults ever.
Right. Okay, I want to point out that it's not just the community-based organizations who have to fundraise. Off the top of my head, UNM TAOS comes to mind. That program gets 40% of their adult education funding from other sources.
Grants and partnerships.
Yeah, grants and partnerships.
You know, at UNM, we did a fact book every year, and the whole adult basic education issue was something that we just didn't have any data about at all in Banner or anything. We had each of our branch campuses would just send us a form each year of how many students they were serving in the community through other programs that weren't part of the regular credit-bearing coursework that's all stored in Banner, and always was amazed at the large numbers they reported for ABE. But, you know, it's one of those things that at least my experience was it wasn't heavily incorporated into the infrastructure of data of the institution, that the programs themselves were having to keep and maintain their own data.
Yeah, the way the data works for adult education is that the Workforce Investment Act requires every state to have a statewide adult education database. And we use one called LACES, which is owned by Literacy Pro Corporation or whatever it is. And that's used by 20-something other states. It's a web-based database, so each of the programs enters their own data. We watch it from here and ensure, you know, accuracy, timeliness, and we're getting it all, you know. So we have remarkable data, but it's not connected to Banner, except there are, CNM did, they connected adult education data, LACES Banner, and I think Doñana has, or was going to, I'm not sure. It's quite an undertaking to do that, but it's a, you know, they're a stepchild. They're large, and the institutions who have them on campus, those branch campuses, often have no idea that they've got this huge program there. They're just kind of a stepchild often. So, see, another thing adult education might be able to potentially do, I bet this is not looking at the concept of political will at all, but relieve the institutions, those post-secondary institutions, of some of their remediation burden, and relieve those remediation students of some of their financial burden at the same time. For them, you know, they have to pay tuition for those courses. Some of the institutions, in fact, are beginning to use adult ed that way. They will funnel people into adult ed instead of remedial if they're low enough. I mean, if they really think they won't make it. So,
Francis, when you say some of the institutions within the state, or is that in other states?
I was speaking of within this state. There's a federal Department of Education initiative now urging developmental education and adult education to get their act together with each other. So there are some states that do a lot more and some that don't. And I don't know the details of that, but that may be some kind of information we should gather.
Have you ever looked, because you have a Social Security number in LACES for the students you're serving if they have a Social Security number? Have you ever looked to see then if they show up in EDIR, taking remedial classes in EDIR?
I don't know if Michael has done that yet, but I did that a few years ago. I looked, it was when Yash was still here a while ago. I asked him to take a fall semester, the most recent one at the time. I don't remember when it was. In my head, thinking that's the biggest, to look at first-time, first-year students that semester in all the institutions in EDIR and see how many were taking one or more remedial classes among the first-time, first-year students, and then look at their high school of origin, the high school they came from, because in EDR I think it says GED.
It does.
Yeah. So look at all those that came from GED high school compared to other high schools. And what I was trying to do is find out if the percentage of first-time, first-year who had to take remedial, who were GED graduates compared to high school graduates. And I found that our students did a little better in that regard, but not significantly better at that time.
There must be other ways students can take the GED without going through an ABE program.
Yes, there are. First of all, our ABE programs are not the only game in the state. We're not a state that regulates that. I think in California you have to go through the state Department of Education to be allowed to pair people. There are people in church basements doing this. There are people at home doing it. There are all kinds of people. We have no idea, frankly, how many people are being served by people we don't fund, because all we know about is the people we fund.
Do you know how many total GED recipients there are, though, and how many of them came through your program?
Yes, we can do that. Michael can do that. Have you done it?
With the GED analytics will be our new tests, so now we can see what other GEDs are being obtained that are not our students, and then we can look at our students versus the rest.
Okay, that'll be interesting.
So I think I'm going to do that. I'm trying to collect data we have to collect and make notes about what we have to look at.
Well, that would speak to other folks serving that need, some of that.
Yeah, 400,000, yeah. I mean, we don't know. For all we know, we're dropping the bucket. Or we may be doing almost everybody. We don't know.
And there are programs getting WIA funds to do
There are
other
programs getting
programs.
Title I.
Title I.
Yeah. Through workforce, right?
Yeah, and do we know anything? No, I don't.
No, but I'll tell you that the workforce, WIOA is the new one.
Okay.
WIOA, Workforce Innovation Opportunities Act. We call it WIOA because we've been on a continuing resolution and not gotten any more money since 2004 or whatever it was, and so we call it WIOA. So, but I know that that is going to, WIA suggested, highly recommended, offered financial incentives for collaboration between workforce and ABE. And that was not, in most states, coming to fruition. So the WIOA is going to have a lot of mandatory collaboration. So we might end up knowing that, or mutually administering some, funds for that. I don't know what the details would be. I know, for example, that we have an adult education state plan that the feds approve, and now we're going to be required, and so does Workforce Solutions, and now we're going to be required to do a joint state plan with them, which is excellent. So there's going to be compulsory collaboration, I think. When I spoke to someone at the LFC about what they thought this should look like, this report, Ms. Tracy, she said a couple of pages with bullets, but appendices with data and stuff that people could look at. So that's what we're looking at here. And I'm trying to figure out how we can volunteer to do pieces, even like go away and access data we have access to, or think of other information we might investigate, and communicate centrally to me so I can like spread it out and get people to look up stuff. So we need information. We need information that gives us a better idea of how much of the need we are serving, what proportion. So we need that. And we need, it seems to me, research about the cost of various program needs I mentioned, like full-time people, professional development, and things like that.
You said you had a list. Seeing that list would be real helpful.
Yeah.
You know, and also the benefit of having it. I mean, we've already heard a little bit how full-time instruction can benefit in terms of the effectiveness of the teaching and making the professional development more effective, because once you've done that with someone, if they stay, you don't have to then repeat it the next semester with a whole new group of adjunct professors. But it'd be really helpful to sort of see a list of the other funding areas and why they'd be important and how you would expect them to be helpful. And if I was being a funder and I wanted to know my money was being spent well, how you would measure and demonstrate that you got the money, you did it for 2 years, and you can show that it worked. You know, I mean, have a plan for how it would be that you would prove or demonstrate or measure that the extra money really did what you hoped it would do.
Are there pools of resources of potential full-time faculty in most communities, or would that be a struggle?
That's why, well, it would be no, wait a minute. It wouldn't be as much of a struggle as I just implied. The reason we don't have certification requirements is because some communities, if we had those, they wouldn't have a program. You know, if we required, as California does, a master's degree in adult education and special certification, you know, we'd be out. But, so there are some programs, we leave it to the program to have their requirements. So we have some programs who require that, a master's degree in something. CNM has pretty high requirements for who can teach an AV. I'm not sure what they are. We at the state level don't mess with that. We just measure the outcomes and they try to be sure they're doing it the right way for their program. But as I said, we have some programs that have teachers who have a GED. Now, about there being available full-time teachers, I think even in small communities, that wouldn't be as hard as it seems. If the community can support, if the community has a need for that many classes, enough for a full-time, I'm sure there could be full-time teachers. Some of the communities, for example, Alamo Navajo School District in Alamo, New Mexico, out in the middle of nowhere, has fewer than 100 students. So there's no real need for a full-time teacher. But then CNM has over 3,000 ABU students, and several full-time teachers and a whole bunch of part-time teachers. Yeah, so there's that kind of variation.
Are there communities who would like to be sponsor an ABE program but you don't have money to fund it? Or how do these 26 recipients get on the list? Are there other people who'd like to be on the list? And could any of these disappear from the list if they don't perform at a certain level?
One did disappear. I hope they're not still on there. We periodically, well, we just recently, a couple or 3 years ago, I guess, did an RFP. That's how we are required by the feds to select subrecipients, is through an RFP process. So that's how they would appear or disappear. We cannot fund too many. So yes, there are people who would like to be on there and maybe deserve to be and can't be.
So you have unfunded proposals through that process?
We have had, yes. And we will probably be required to do a new RFP at some point shortly after we owe you.
So that might be another way of measuring need for full funding. I mean, if you had some unfunded proposals of people who you believed met the minimum requirement and you didn't have money for them, would that be another measure of what full funding could have provided?
It might.
And is it through the feds that there isn't enough money for the total program need? Or is that a state thing? Like the feds give us a certain amount of money and they require us to have a certain number of programs?
They do not require anything much, actually. They require incredible accountability. The data they require us to keep. And they're not easy on us. But, for example, they are perfectly happy with Arizona serving fewer students with 3 times their money than we serve. And when they come, which they did in October or late September, I can't remember, to do a monitoring visit, they were all about, think about it, you might be serving too many people. But they aren't ever telling us how many you serve.
Do we have, does the program have aspirational targets for 2015, 2018, 2020 in order to meet those targets, whether they be numbers served, the performance improvement, then that would drive resources necessary to get there.
You just gave me a great idea. I was thinking that we know the legislature just did a study that I don't think I actually ever saw, but I heard it referred to in a couple of committee meetings, that by 2020 or something there will be, they studied the need for qualified employees and in New Mexico by 2020 and found that there weren't going to be enough if everybody in the K-12 and the school pipeline now even finished. We're going to have to import more and more people to do the work. And those people who aren't in that pipeline anymore, those adults, could help with that tremendously. So maybe we could set goals that are explicitly aligned with those kinds of employment goals, you think?
I think that would document fully funding some kind of workload, whatever that workload be, and if that workload is tied to those aspirational achievements.
Right.
Then regardless whether the state has a good year or a bad year, I think making a commitment to reach that target of X percent with either some kind of high school equivalency, X percent that are employed, whatever measure they want to see by that time frame, pulling out along the way, or not fully funding the workload along the way.
Right. So in this, okay, could you flip over your fact sheet there? You see the return on investment sheet there?
Oh.
Now, I can tell you, I think it tells you how we calculated that, but I can tell you if you have questions what the deal is with it. When you look at a group's contribution to the economy based on their earnings, you've got to figure out how much they put into the economy. So economists measure that by, they say, percentage propensity to invest, to save, to import, or to consume. And they have ways of computing, depending on your income level and where you live, what your propensity to do all of those things is. And so when we count the student income that they achieved after they were through our program, that's actual money that we got from workforce investment, student by student. We count them as having 100% propensity to consume. That they are putting it all back into the economy because they're poor. They aren't making great wages. They have to spend it on gas, rent, and food. So I wanted you to know that was our assumption when we assumed that contribution piece.
Kind of going off of the question, what information do we have in terms of like average or is there chunks of time of how long it takes to get a student through a program? You know, if it's like, where are we in terms of what the levels of the students are beginning? How, because some students, like you say, come in with a high school credential already and they take less time. But if we're looking at workforce requirements many years out, like we have these many students with need, but you know, how much time is it going to take us? How much money is it going to? Because sort of like your 40-hour workforce question in terms of outputs, what that would look like.
So it would be good to see if the students, which most of ours do come in at this little level, how long does it on the average take them to get somewhere, to get out of our program? I believe you guys were going to look at that.
Yeah, that's one of our plans. I mean, when we get the data, that's one of the big things
that would be great if you would, because I really want to see that.
And probably based on different groups, you know, how long does it take? If you come in with X, you know, score on your pre-test, how long does it take you versus something else?
Yeah, and how about comparing our students to those in the educational pipeline, who are in the system, the other system? Would that be of use or not? I mean, I know that we don't expect, and I know this would not ever happen. The directors, keep listening to me here, because I'm going to ask you for input on this, but I am thinking that if a student comes in with beginning literacy, really needing to read, we certainly have no expectation that they will spend 12 years getting ready for college, because they won't stay that long. It's too much. That's the drag. But do we know how many of those people get that far? Anybody out there?
What do you mean by that far, Francis?
To the point of having a high school credential and being ready to transition to something like college or a career.
Are you asking approximately how long it takes on average?
Do people, well, my first question is, if someone comes in at beginning literacy, do our people who come in at beginning literacy tend to go all that distance, or do they tend to go only a certain distance? That's another thing I don't know.
A lot would depend. I mean, we don't at Catholic Charities, because our students tend to transition to C&M's Adult Basic Education Program because we only serve lower level learners. We don't actually have those kinds of statistics.
Right.
But within lists, would we have
And Francis,
from both institutions?
We could find that out, yes.
I think that's one of the big things that when we get the data, we want
to look at.
and we have the people to do it.
You guys are whispering.
Sorry, we'll quit. We didn't want you to hear it.
Right.
and as to the time it takes, that can vary. I always, that's the one question I almost always get when a person first enrolls, and I tell them I can't tell them. It depends on their skill level when they start, and it depends on how much time and effort they want to put into it.
Yeah.
I've had kids get through the program in 1 week, who come in with exceptional skills and they time it perfectly, and then others that enrolled before I even got here 9 years ago, who are terminal stopouts who just sign up and then drop out and sign up and drop out and sign up and drop out, and I don't know if they'll ever finish.
Okay, so we've got to figure out a way to look at our numbers to figure things out like this, because if we find, for example, that most of the people at some level never make it to getting to where they can have a livable income and become members of the community instead of clients, you know. We might want to do something about that. Look at why.
There are some limitations to that, Francis, though, because in the case of students that are, say, undocumented, and a lot of ours actually do have a desire to go to college. The problem is that even with a college degree, they can't legally work in the United States. So it's kind of a touchy situation. A lot of our students do work, but not necessarily legally.
Right. And you have a lot of students who have advanced degrees, but don't know English.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Right, and until they learn English, they can't do anything with that degree. They have to know English proficiently and to a level where they can pass certification testing.
So, Francis, are we saying that our program success measures might look different under a new funding formula?
Yeah. Michael, would it be easy to bring up that slide that just had PBF with this little square?
Sure.
If the thing about a funding formula, you know, our funding formula, you mean the way we fund our programs?
Currently.
Yeah, the thing about a funding formula is we all know that recipients of funding chase whatever the formula is, and that's their job, you know, get their programs funded. So the thing about a funding formula is to make the effort, I think, to get funded people to head the direction you want them to go. So we, for example, one of the performance measures we have is level gains. Now, there's a way in which that's just silly, in a way, because a level gain is kind of an internal measure of how the program is, how the teacher's doing maybe, and it's also a very short-term thing, you know. But we're currently funding for that because it does show that they're working with the students. So, but now we have set as goals high school credentials, getting a job, going to post-secondary, because those are core goals the feds have identified for us. But on the other hand, we do not have to fund based on those core goals if we don't want to. So we could fund based on all kinds of things. And depending on what, if the legislature decided to base its funding decisions on something we aren't looking at, we would certainly begin to look at that. And is that the sense of your question?
Yeah, I'm struggling with it. It seems like there's a lot of different measures for student success with this population. So how do we define those? And then maybe use those to help us benchmark some of the funding.
Well, I was just going to say, obviously you've looked at other states' setups. Have we compared statistically how we, with our current structure, with our current funding, how our outcomes perform or compared to another state who has similar makeup, you know, they're not going to be exact, but with a disproportionate, large poverty population, large transient, whatever.
I got together a couple of things, and we have a pretty easy way to make those comparisons too. Michael, could you go to my flash drive quick?
Using your example of Arizona,
They've
they've obviously made the choice to use greater resources for a fewer amount of individuals in the program. How does that translate to performance at the very end?
Table 5, Michael, down there, do we have an Arizona table 5? No. We have an Arizona table 4. Okay, let's look at Arizona table 4. Right there, yeah. And then and then we want to look at New Mexico table 4 to show them. I'll just show them Arizona table 4 so you can see what to look at. These are, we have about, I don't know how many tables, it's 15 or 20 that we prepare for the feds. And they're all the same, so that's kind of good. There we go. Okay, to orient you to this. This is Arizona. Down the left side are the names of the levels. You notice there are 12. The first 6 are called ABE and the last 6 are USL. You can see how many enrolled, their total attendance number, and the number who completed the level. And then the last column tells you the percent who completed the level. Percent of those enrolled.
The percent who completed, or the percent who enrolled at the beginning?
The percent of the ones who enrolled who completed.
Who enrolled that completed?
Yes.
So D is the numerator and the B is the denominator.
Okay.
So if you look at overall, in their right-hand corner there, lower right-hand corner, 64% of all of them completed a level. Now, Michael, if you would minimize that and bring up Mexico's table 4. These are for the most recent year we have data. You can kill us.
You said New Mexico.
NM4, 2 down from where you are. There. Yeah. See?
Oh my goodness.
You guys, we're not seeing what you're seeing, just FYI.
Oh, you're not?
Oh, bummer.
We're only seeing the memorial.
1%.
Less than half.
Completion, level completion rate last year in New Mexico.
Yeah, that I knew.
Okay, and they had 64, I believe. We looked at Colorado and at Texas. You want to look at those?
No, but it's just
Yeah.
leading me, if these are common reporting criteria that every state must complete, and as long as the feds are not planning on changing their formula to our knowledge, then I would think we would want to create some levels of attainment where we move from, let's just say for the sake of conversation, we're in the bottom quarter of states, that over the next 5 years we would want to move up to the next quarter. In order to do that, we could only serve X amount of students, which would mean the workload would look like blah, blah, blah. Just a suggestion.
Yeah. And I think that, in fact, the bottom quartile is where we are with level gains. So not with the core goals. Could you get New Mexico's table 5, please, Michael?
New Mexico table 5.
Right, it wouldn't be based on just that one
Right,
table.
yeah,
It would be a
right.
series of tables.
It
Sure.
should be, yeah. But what you're suggesting is that one of our measures for workload, or whether some way do we deserve funds, is our advancement compared to the nation, kind of. Okay. Now, you will see along the left hand the core goals the feds examine. We're on table 5.
Not really.
You can't see it, yeah.
Yeah, it all went away. It was there for a second, Francis, and then it all went away. Now the memorial is back up again for us.
I think it's because, yeah, one of the screens is the go-to-meeting screen, but it's not the one we're seeing. It's
Yeah. I got to flip back and forth so they can see it.
There you go.
Okay, we can't see it.
I know. So we'll go back and forth. So I'm going to go back and forth.
No, just leave it one place for a minute. These folks don't, the program directors know what we're talking about. So entered employment,
That's true.
employment, obtained GED, and entered post-secondary. Those are the 4 core goals they like us to look at. The number of participants in cohort, for entered employment means the number of students who at enrollment were unemployed. Retained employment is the number of students, I believe, who were employed or became employed while they were enrolled. Obtained a GED, the number of students in the cohort is the number of students who took the entire GED test. Entered post-secondary education or training is the number of students who obtained a GED or entered with a high school diploma is in the cohort. That's the percentage. Okay. Everybody out there knows that. So you will see we have, on the right-hand side, our achievement was 29% entered employment. I'm going to write these down real quick so I want to compare it to Texas because I see I collected Texas. 38 retained high. Yeah, go on.
Just before you go, can you explain what these cohorts are? Because they're obviously smaller than the total GED enrollment, so how are the cohorts defined in each of these?
The first cohort entered employment is the number of students who had enrollment were unemployed.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And then, like, for GED, it's how many took all the tests.
So for the employment one, do they have to identify that as a goal?
No.
Okay, so just if you're unemployed, you're in that cohort.
In the old days, they had to identify it as a goal.
Okay.
Now they do not.
So just coming in.
So and then these are the ones who are employed, the 4,754 retained employment, correct?
Came in with a job, yeah.
Came in with a job. But weren't there more than, 10,000 people enrolled in ABE total?
Yeah, but there are ways of not having a job and not being unemployed.
And that would be like
You're
the other
not
half.
in the workforce.
Are neither unemployed
You're not in the
nor have a-
workforce. It's the way the government measures it that way. You've got to be looking for,
Right,
If you're retired, I'm not interested in it.
right, not in the workforce. So half of ABE students in
Not.
Mexico are not in the workforce.
or
at
they've
all.
given up.
Right, just not in the
Okay.
workforce.
Or
That's interesting.
they may be from a community where it's subsistence working, like their family may have a cattle ranch that they work on.
Mhm.
And they're not looking for a job, and that doesn't count as a job. Okay, could you do Table 5 for Texas, Michael? I'm just curious.
Sure.
And put that where the people out, you can't do both where both people can see it, even if you close that.
So this is Table 5, Texas.
Okay, everybody, New Mexico, 29% achieved entered employment. Texas, 50. New Mexico retained employment, 38. Texas, 72. New Mexico attained a GED, 90. Texas, 82. Transition to post-secondary. New Mexico, 36%, and Texas, 20.
So could the job issue be just an issue of available data rather than actual performance?
Yes. Any of this
Right.
issue of available data rather than performance.
Francis, does Texas require Social Security numbers?
Nobody requires Social Security numbers. They can't.
It would be a more fair comparison if you're modified your number of participants in the cohort to look at how many of them have a Social Security number.
It would.
And then compare your match. You might get numbers more like Texas if you did that. I mean, it doesn't mean that. I mean, it'd just be a more fair match because now you're getting a self-report, you're employed when you're hired. I mean, I guess we could just assume people about Social Security numbers aren't employed, but I don't really believe
I don't think
that.
we can, no.
If these are all data points that everybody has to report, does it federally, isn't there a compiled report that does all these comparative?
That's where we got this.
That might be interesting.
Do I have a U.S. Table 5? I think I do. I think I put one in my draft. Yeah, I think I have one.
All West? 4?
No, all.
Table
No,
5?
down here. I don't have them all, do I?
Or-
Table 4 all.
I have a table 4 all. Yeah, let's look
It's
at
right
that.
under over. There you
That's table 4. That's not the last, but let's see what it says.
That's enrollment.
Okay, total nationwide 43.8% level gains, everybody, if you can't see that, which is somewhere between us and Arizona.
go. I think it might be interesting for us. It will be for me because I'm obviously a blank slate. So this will be interesting for me to see those kinds of.
We will, okay, I've got to email all of you. I will email a website where you can explore it like crazy for this stuff. NRS website.
There's no login necessary.
No, there's just plain old public.
So you all contract with LACIS for the data, then does LACIS then provide this data to the feds?
We do. LACIS provides the database, the program and support, and pays for cloud storage or wherever it lives. I don't know where it lives.
Posted solution.
But it is in the Fed format, so it's easy to upload to the Fed.
So it's easier for you to pull the data for New Mexico from that and upload it.
Yes, sir.
And see, Michael gets, each of our programs keeps all this data. So we can compare each subgrantee to each other. We help, I don't think they have access to each other's data, but we publish it for them so they can see it and compare to each other. And so they get to talk. You know, I always thought I couldn't do this because I was small, and I see you're small and you're great at it, and what happened, you know, like that.
Well, as you mentioned, you're looking for people to volunteer. This is something that would really help me understand. So I'm happy to scour that website and do some
And come up with everything you think is
for things that I think that
or
is
interesting.
useful for us in our discussion.
Thank you so much. That's really exciting. So,
And I unfortunately would have to leave for about an hour because I've got a meeting with the secretary. But if there's anything that could help Michael out in terms of matching to EDIR or anything like that, I can help with that. Just I can pull files. Dina's really slammed right now.
Okay.
But I can help with that.
Sure, definitely. I'll do that later. I'll definitely find you later.
Yeah, all right.
I don't think we'll probably, I think we're going to be winding up pretty soon. It looks
All right.
like yeah.
But I'll be available for future. I just got a conflict, so I apologize.
And I want to point out about socials real quick, Mark.
Sure.
No, it's quick. You can, I'll be
I can
done
stand.
when you get there.
I'll walk slow.
We don't look at people's documentation.
No, I understand.
Arizona will not allow you to be an ABE unless you're documented.
See, that's kind of my point. So I'm not sure that comparison is fair.
Yeah. And I don't know what Texas's approach is to that.
But we know the governor is.
Thanks, Mark.
And we offer a GED in the Spanish language here. New Jersey does. I believe Texas does. And maybe California is going to, but not many people do. We're constitutionally required to. We're the only state in the country that has an official language in its constitution, and we have 2. Okay, so we're going to, so this will be maybe in the next week or so, we can mine some information that's of interest to us. You can do the stuff you're interested in your project, and you're going to mine the NRS database.
Francis, would it be helpful to look at some other models of funding in other states?
Yes, funding.
And
How the state legislatures determine it.
so there, and are there specific states? I would be interested in doing that research.
How would you know how to find that? I wouldn't know how to find that
Just
out.
on the web, we can see what, just look up funding formulas for adult basic education
And
and just see if
zero
they're,
it in to see what the legislatures look at, because
I will also ask NCSL if they, the National Conference of State Legislatures, if they can,
okay.
if they have
If they
anything
can
about
help.
what states do. Yeah.
yeah, how they make decisions about adult education funding. Because I don't think ours has a way of making, they just, people say, here's how much is needed, and they say why, and it gets voted on.
Other states are looking at more performance-based funding, there might be information out there, maybe through professional organizations, adult basic education. I'm not sure, but I can do a little research on that.
I would love that. Anybody out there? Hello?
Oh, we're here.
Okay. Could you?
We're just stealthy.
You're hiding.
Yeah, we're here.
Could you maybe figure out a way to come up with some costs for certain kinds of professional development? Just rough estimates. Because you all have been working on.
Yes. What are you talking about? Are you talking about Are you talking about a certification process, or are you talking about general
I'm just
needs
talking
for
about
professional development year long?
if we had a professional development system in the state doing certain things every year, like to help, yeah, you know what I mean. You've been working on helping develop that system. How much?
Yeah, we can do that.
How
We
much
can do
would it
that.
cost for each part? Because it seems to me if you save anything money to the legislature, you got to tell them what, or if they say any money to you, you got to say what it's going to be spent on, and what will be the outcome of doing that.
Right.
I mean, if they said to us,
Better teachers?
if we gave you $5 million more, if we doubled your funding, what would you do with it? I think we ought to have some idea. I mean, not that they'll ever say that, but.
Right, no, we can do that.
Okay, so when should we get together again? It should be soon, because we've got to get it written in about 3 weeks.
So what is the deadline?
August 1st.
August 1st. To have a report to
the LESC. When would you like to get together again?
How about mid-August? I mean, mid-July I meant.
That's next week.
Okay, late mid-July.
No, we can't go late mid-July. Because what I anticipate at the next meeting is we should have a lot more information, enough to construct a report, and to know what other data we want to actually attach to it and run and get what we don't have. Does that make sense? I think we ought to be able to figure that out at the next meeting.
Yeah, because if there's a draft of the report a week before August 1st that everybody could look at
That's right.
and approve before we turn it in, that'd be good.
It almost seems like weekly. Is what we're gonna
So
need
like
to do.
Monday? Would that work? If
Next
not-
Monday?
Yeah.
LESC's in Farmington, they're not here today, but they're in Farmington Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday next week, so if any of them wanted to come, they wouldn't be able to come those days. So maybe Thursday. Or is that too late?
Thursday's the 17th.
Thursday may not be too late. How's Thursday for people on the phone, on the web? Wherever?
Next Thursday?
Not this coming one, yeah.
Yeah, that's fine with me.
Francis,
You
next
are
Thursday
talking
is
about,
the,
what, the
item-
17th?
Wait a minute, two of you are talking. I heard Tom. Could you wait just 1 second? You were second. Who was first?
Tina.
Tina.
Francis, next, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Next Thursday is the iBest retreat. So it was supposed to be Thursday and Friday, but we've narrowed it down just to Thursday. So any other day of the week I'm fine, but not Thursday.
Oh, I think I have.
What about Friday, Francis?
Hang on, I've got an issue. This project is recently assigned to me, and I am not going to be here. I will have to do this remotely. So any old day. Friday work?
One of us could run the meeting, Francis.
Yes, you could. Absolutely.
I volunteer Tina.
Tina,
And I was busy unmuting myself. I was going to volunteer Terry.
That's the iBest retreat too, Tina, on Friday. So
at our last phone conference, they were suggesting canceling it all altogether, and they decided to just do Thursday. So it's not going to be 2 days. It'll just be one day.
Is Friday okay? So that
Friday's good for me.
that gives us 2 weeks to really get a lot of stuff. This is
So you're saying Friday the 18th?
Yeah,
I'm only available in the morning.
in the morning.
Morning is good.
Tom, you
9 a.m.?
Yeah, 9 would be great, I think. You had a comment a minute ago, and I asked you to wait for Tina.
Oh, I was just wondering about the specific date. You were talking about Thursdays and Fridays, and you didn't mention whether it was the 10th or the 17th or 18th or whatever. That's all.
Oh, okay, thanks. Okay, so we have the next meeting set 9 o'clock a week from Friday. Some of us have more specific research agendas than others. But I will keep developing some and asking other people to do it, like Michael and Mark, and as we move along, because that gives us a little time.
Do you need full-time faculty? Like the cost of full-time faculty, or do we
That
have
would
that
be
as a
nice.
program?
No, it would be nice to have some kind of even generic information. And what also would be nice is to have someone find one of the studies that talks about the return on investment for having full-time faculty, because I know universities are tending to try to get more part-time too, and they're studying it a lot now again because of the feared effect it will have on student outcomes.
I can do the costing piece if somebody else wants to do the other piece of the research, or looking for costs within the state.
Look for the research about it. Okay, so we got to search out Okay, and you're going to come up with some costing things about professional development, some of you in the field who are on the professional development task force. Okay, so, no, don't do any of that on there because it's to-do list. 9 a.m. Here? Sure. Thank you so much. I know that for people just asked to serve in a working group for something they haven't been involved with. It's kind of a steep curve to climb sometimes. But now we'll all know more about it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And we'll see you a week from Friday.
Thank you, everyone, for.
All right.
When I put it back from this, you need to give me the.
Oh,
See y'all later.
All right, guys. Thank you again for coming.
NRS.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everybody.
NRS.
Bye.
NRS. Oh, no, NRS. Should I date it?